Hello, Jessica. Could you come over to my place for a bit? It was a call from Ashley, my husband David's sister. She sounded panicked, like she was really stressed out. Ashley's house is just a short walk away. All right. I'll come over right now. When I arrived at her house, she led me to her room. The room was swarming with bees. Whoa! What's going on here? When I opened this box, this happened. I knew we needed to call Ashley's husband, Robert, who was at a cafe, so I called him to come home. Thinking it was too difficult to talk in a room full of bees, we decided to step outside. The three of us gathered at the front door. I questioned Ashley. So, Ashley, why is there a box full of bees in your house? I have no idea. I just found it outside and brought it in. That can't be right. That box was sent to me by my daughter Emily. My name is Jessica, a 65-year-old part-timer at a local supermarket. There's something that's been constant since my childhood. I've always loved stuffed animals and teddy bears. Growing up in a poor family, I couldn't often get stuffed animals or teddy bears. But now, as an adult, I buy a teddy bear every time I travel or go out, and it's become my hobby to collect them. My husband David indulges this childlike hobby of mine. David works as a public servant at the town hall. About a year ago, there was a teddy bear I really wanted. It was a limited edition sold exclusively through an online shop, part of a collaboration between a famous brand and a popular character. However, I had never shopped online before. So, I was ready to give up on getting this limited edition item. I was talking about this with David. If it's about online shopping, leave it to me. Recently, my office started ordering things online. Really? Yes. So I'll order it for you. You're amazing! Thank you! David immediately took out his PC and ordered it, showing me how to use the online shop. Whenever I was in trouble, David was always there to help. Since then, I've started buying daily necessities, groceries, and even teddy bears online. Around December of that year, the supermarket where I work got very busy. As a senior staff member, I ended up working almost every day. This limited my time to receive packages ordered online. David was even busier. So, we decided to rethink our package receiving method. We learned about contactless delivery, where packages are left at the doorstep even if no one is home. From that time on, we primarily used contactless delivery. Just recently, while I was taking a break at work, I received a text from the delivery person. It was a notification that my contactless delivery package had arrived. I had received many similar texts before, so it was business as usual. I noticed something unusual only after I got home. Walking through the gate of our house and arriving at the front door, I glanced around my feet. However, the package set for contactless delivery was not in its usual spot. Considering other possibilities, I stepped outside the gate again. This is strange, I muttered suddenly. The cawing of crows echoed across the sunset-colored sky. David was not yet back from work but would be home soon. Since I had to prepare dinner before he returned, I decided to put the delivery aside and went inside the house. Once I started cooking dinner, I got so absorbed in the cooking that the delivery completely slipped my mind. In the following days, I was busy with household chores and work, having no time to deal with the still undelivered package. That weekend, on Sunday, while watching the morning news, David said, "I feel like having that pizza today." By that pizza, he meant the pizza from the place we often go to. That place is a cafe run by my sister-in-law Ashley and her husband Robert, with Robert being the chef and owner. David and I both had the day off for the first time in a while, and David made this suggestion early in the morning. "Jessica, how about we go to that cafe after a long time? Sure, let's go. Even though we say we go often, it's roughly once a month. Typically, it's on the days when both David and I have the day off, and David feels like going. Because Robert's pizza is exquisite and one of his favorite foods. So, just like usual, we decided to go to the cafe that day. The cafe is very close to our home. Under the clear blue sky, the two of us walked to the cafe. When we opened the cafe door, the metal doorbell rang. Welcome! Oh my, isn't it David and Jessica? Thanks for having us. Please, take a seat at the counter. We were guided to the counter seats right in front of the kitchen. Well, both of you together. How have you been? As usual, the two of them, skilled at customer service, greeted us energetically. We're still going strong. Although there were only 4 people in the store, it felt bustling. I loved this cheerful atmosphere and thought this place was wonderful. Robert, can we have the usual 2, please? Leave it to me. Saying this, Robert blushed and started baking the pizza. He sliced the freshly baked pizza and handed it to Ashley. 2 pizzas, here you go. This pizza is incredibly delicious. Even though we've had it many times, it's a taste that you suddenly crave, and it's always delicious whenever you eat it. After we finished the pizza, they served us some coffee. It really is delicious every time. Thank you. Ashley said this while sitting across from me at the counter. At that moment, I noticed something. She was wearing earrings similar to the ones I had ordered from an online shop. Ashley, those earrings are cute. Where did you get them? Really? Thanks. I bought these from an online shop. Is that so? Online shopping is really convenient, isn't it? Yes, it is. But with this cafe running all the time, I'm hardly ever home during the day and don't have time to receive packages. In that case, how about using contactless delivery? Contactless delivery? Is that really a thing? I decided to explain the concept of contactless delivery in detail. As I was explaining, I recalled my own experiences with contactless delivery and began to share them. Contactless delivery is great, but sometimes there are mistakes. There have been a few times when my packages didn't arrive. I've paid for them, so I want to contact the delivery company, but I just don't have the time. Really? I didn't know that could happen. At this point, I decided to check the status of my current contactless delivery packages again. The top one, a limited edition teddy bear I ordered yesterday, was still showing as preparing for shipment. I pointed it out to Ashley. Ashley, look. It says this hasn't been delivered yet. Yeah, I see. Then, I pointed to the second item on the list, a set of cosmetics marked as delivered. This one is supposed to have arrived already, but it hasn't. I wonder what's going on. I hope you find it. At this moment, I glanced at David. David and the others were discussing something else, but we ended up talking about this issue. Well, I guess we should just wait and see if it gets delivered eventually. He gave a nonchalant smile as he said this. David has such a laid-back personality that he didn't seem to think it was a big deal. After our small talk, we left the store. On the way back home, I suddenly opened my mobile phone to check the delivery history again. The status hadn't changed, most of the packages were still marked as delivered. I started thinking about the possible reasons why they hadn't arrived. Maybe the local delivery company was holding on to them, or they were delivered to the wrong house. Surely, no one in the neighborhood would steal a package left on someone else's doorstep. My biggest concern now was whether the limited edition teddy bear, which was supposed to arrive soon, would actually get delivered. I decided that if the teddy bear didn't arrive, I would pursue the matter further. I had made up my mind about that. 2 days had passed since our visit to the cafe. As soon as I finished work, I eagerly checked my mobile phone. The status of the long-awaited limited edition teddy bear had changed to delivered. I quickly changed out of my work clothes and left the office. My pace quickened as I headed home. When I arrived, I looked for the package. But there was no sign of the box anywhere.
Why?
I was frustrated that the package hadn't arrived at my house yet, and I was still without an answer as to why. Until now, the missing items had been things like cosmetics and spices, so I didn't feel the urgency to resolve it quickly. However, this time was different. The teddy bear, which I had been looking forward to adding to my collection, hadn't arrived. I was determined to get to the bottom of this. That night, I talked to David about it.
The teddy bear that was supposed to arrive today didn't come. That's serious. How many times has this happened now? Maybe 3 times. It's really strange, isn't it?
Let's call the delivery company right now.
Yes, let's do that.
I called the delivery company. But, as expected, the result was the same. The delivery person who handled the package answered the phone.
The package set for contactless delivery is missing. Really? I definitely left it at the front door.
Is that so? I thought it might still be with you. What's going on? So, it's possible someone stole it. How about reporting it to the police? Thank you. I'll think about it. For some reason, I felt sorry for the delivery person too. Even if I file a theft report, I wasn't sure if it was really stolen, and I was a bit troubled. At that moment, David said, "Let's ask Emily. She might know a solution." Emily is our daughter who turned 40 this year. She is now married to a man who works at a beekeeping farm and spends her days with a lot of bees. Since it would be easy to talk to Emily, we decided to rely on her.
Hello, Emily?
What's up? It's about the last month. You see, our contactless delivery packages haven't been arriving. I detailed the recent delivery issues to Emily. Of course, I also told her that the delivery person confirmed they had delivered the packages.
It might have been stolen. I thought so too. What should I do?
If the packages are being stolen every time, I have a good idea. Then she suggested something quite outrageous. I'll send some bees. If the thief receives them, we'll know who's stealing the packages. Honestly, I thought it was too bold, but it might be worth a try.
Can you really do that?
Don't worry. We have thousands of bees. It'll help identify the thief quickly. Half doubtful, half believing, I waited for the bees to arrive. A few days later, after work, I checked my phone and saw that the package had been delivered. When I got home and checked the front porch, the package was gone as usual. I wasn't sure if this was good or bad, but there was nothing I could do at the moment. Feeling quite resigned, I spent a few hours in a daze. Then my phone rang. It was a call from Ashley.
Hello, Jessica. Can you come over for a bit?
Her voice sounded urgent and panicked. Ashley lives just a short walk away. Okay, I'll come over right now. When I arrived at Ashley's house, she led me to her room. The room was full of bees buzzing around.
Whoa! What's this? I opened the box and this happened.
First, I was shocked to see the room full of bees, and then I was stunned to realize that Ashley was the thief. Emily had told me that bees at this time of year wouldn't sting unless provoked. So, I hadn't been stung yet, but I didn't know about Ashley. I thought I should call Robert, who was likely at the cafe, and I dialed his number. Since discussing this in a room full of bees was impossible, we stepped outside. The three of us gathered in front of the house. I questioned Ashley there.
Now, Ashley, why do you have that box of bees in your house? I don't know. I just took it and opened it because it was in front of my house. That can't be. That box was sent to me by Emily. I'm telling you, I don't know anything about it. Did you steal it, Ashley? I'm telling you, I didn't.
Ashley raised her voice.
If you say you didn't, can we check your room? Maybe we'll find more stolen items. No way, that's not possible. I'll just check the room for a bit.
With that said, she walked into the room alone, possibly to clean up before I entered. I had no chance to follow her, so I waited outside.
What's going on? Recently, my contactless delivery orders hadn't been arriving. I suspected they were being stolen, so I consulted Emily. She then sent that bee.
As I explained the situation to Robert, we heard Ashley scream.
Ouch!
Apparently, she had panicked and ended up agitating the bee, which stung her. Ashley came out of the room looking exhausted. With the room in that state, please leave for today. She meant that with the bees flying around, we couldn't enter the room today. Just then, a stranger approached us. He was a man named James, a beekeeper living nearby, and an acquaintance of Emily. After introducing himself, James said, "Emily asked me to collect the bees. Is that okay?" "Yes, please do." While Ashley was still flustered, Robert and I guided James into the room. We continued talking outside while waiting for the bees to be collected. "Looks like we'll be able to check the room today."
"But there's nothing to see. It's all stuff I bought myself."
Ashley was unusually assertive. She probably intended to claim everything in the room was hers. After about 30 minutes, James returned. "It's done. I collected all 900 bees."
900 bees?
Shocked by the sheer number of bees, the three of us entered the room. I looked around the room. As I explored every corner, I found various items like fabric softeners and cosmetics that I had ordered.
"So, you stole all of these too?" "No, but..."
I showed her the order history on my phone.
"Are you still going to lie? There's a chance I just bought the same things, right?"
I was slightly exasperated but continued searching for the teddy bear. Eventually, I spotted the familiar teddy bear in the corner of the sofa.
"Did you buy this teddy bear too?" "Yes, I did."
I knew this teddy bear was a limited edition, each with a unique serial number. So, I checked my phone for my teddy bear's number and compared it with the one in the room. It had the same 5-digit number.
"This teddy bear is mine. Look, it has the same number."
I showed Ashley and Robert.
"Can recent plush toys really tell us that?"
Robert muttered. Ashley sat down on the sofa, looking down silently.
"You've been stealing our deliveries, haven't you?"
Yes. Her voice grew heavy.
"What did you steal?" "You didn't use any of it, did you?"
I used some lotion and spices, just a little bit.
"Why did you do that?"
I was more curious about her motive than angry about the theft. Well, I didn't have enough money. My expenses exceeded my allowance. That's all.
"But why did you spend so much money? What did you spend it on?" "That is, well..."
Ashley stammered. It seemed like there was something she was hiding, but she didn't seem ready to talk about it. Then suddenly, Robert moved and picked up a scrap of paper that had fallen under the couch.
"Hey, what's this?" You didn't."
Saying that, Robert showed me a piece of paper with numbers and amounts written on it. "I'm sorry, I got carried away." The piece of paper Robert showed was a betting ticket for horse racing. In other words, She had become obsessed with horse racing, using the money she saved by taking everyday items from me to bet on horse races. What a terrible thing to do. And then, Robert said something even more shocking.
Ashley, you didn't take money from the store's sales, did you?
Just a little.
I thought the accounts weren't adding up. How could you?
It turned out she had been embezzling from their cafe sales. I'm really sorry. I won't do it again. Please forgive me. Ashley cried out, raising her voice in an attempt to apologize. But for me, the fact that she had taken even one of my treasured teddy bears was unforgivable. Her apology didn't move me at all. And Robert looked visibly frustrated too.
Actually, I secretly recorded everything since I started collecting the bees. No way.
See you in court. With solid evidence in hand, Robert and I decided to file a report. First, Robert filed for divorce. Then, charges of theft of my belongings and embezzlement were brought against Ashley. In the end, she was arrested. We were satisfied with that outcome. Robert's cafe hired more staff, and sales steadily increased. By the way, I started working part-time at the cafe. Ashley was arrested, huh? It's for the best. It's better not to be with someone like that. I'm much happier now, surrounded by people who work hard. Yes, let's keep doing our best. Robert already seemed to be looking ahead. And from then on, my packages arrived properly at my house. Of course, many new teddy bears joined my collection. David and I went on trips to collect limited edition teddy bears, and surrounded by so many teddy bears, I am living a very happy life with David.
You cheated on me, didn't you?
My husband Tom was holding our newborn baby and shouted right in front of me. I had just finished the huge task of giving birth and returned to my hospital room, and that's what my husband said to me.
What are you talking about?
I had absolutely no idea what he meant. I've been faithful to Tom since before we got married, and I have no reason to do something like that after getting married. I couldn't understand why he would say such a thing, and I was furious that he would say that to his wife right after giving birth.
This baby's eyes are blue. You cheated on me with a foreigner, didn't you? That's impossible!
I yelled back without thinking. I retorted while enduring the pain in my body. Tom quickly put the baby in the bassinet, as if he had touched something dirty. I was angry that he reacted that way to our own child. I picked the baby back up. The baby suddenly opened its eyes. They were clear blue eyes, like glass. How? Both Tom and I have brown eyes. I've never seen eyes this blue before.
I really didn't cheat on you. I have no idea why this happened. Don't lie. There's no other explanation except that you cheated. I'm telling you, it's not possible. I really don't know why.
I gave birth to this child myself, so there's no doubt it's my baby. I've never heard of any foreigners in my or Tom's family. If that's the case, I truly don't understand why this child has blue eyes.
Please, let's do a DNA test.
A DNA test should prove this child's relationship to Tom. When I desperately pleaded, Tom stared at me intently.
If this child isn't yours, I'll divorce you. I'll even pay alimony. But I really have no idea how this happened. This is your child. Please, just let me prove it.
Tom's voice echoed in the silent hospital room. His answer was, "My name is Sophie. I'm turning 29 this year. I work an office job at a company in Boston. I was born in the South, but I've lived in Boston ever since I got into college. I'm married to Tom, who is 1 year older than me, and we live together. Tom works at a sports equipment company. Having grown up in a snowy area, I joined the ski club as soon as I started college. Tom was an upperclassman in the club at the time. He wasn't as used to snow as I was. But he loves sports and got hooked on skiing during a high school trip, so he went to ski resorts whenever he had the chance after that. He's quite skilled. Tom and I hit it off right away, since we both wanted to improve our skiing techniques. We always participated in the club's ski trips together, so naturally we started spending more time together and got closer. Then 6 months later, Tom said he wanted to date me seriously. That's how we became a couple, and our relationship progressed smoothly after that. After graduating, we both started working in Boston. I had become a working adult 1 year earlier. I moved into Tom's apartment and we started living together. Of course, the reason we chose to live together was that we wanted to be with each other. But that wasn't the only reason. Before graduating, we had discussed that we wanted to get married eventually, so establishing a financial foundation came first. If I lived in Tom's place, we could put all the rent money into savings instead. That way we could save up for our wedding faster. With that in mind, we cut back on ski trips until we had enough saved up. Eventually, Tom and I both gained more work experience and felt like we could continue our jobs long term. We reached our savings goal. Thrilled that we could finally get married, we decided to meet each other's parents first. My parents live far away, so both of us would need to take time off to visit them. Inevitably, we ended up going to Tom's parents' place first. Actually, Tom had only recently told his parents about dating me. Apparently they're old-fashioned and believe unmarried couples should keep their relationship pure.
It's a very traditional area, so my parents don't approve of premarital relationships until the future is decided.
My hometown is rural too, so I get it. Times have changed, but it can't be helped.
That's why they think you and I are still living separately. If they ask, just go along with that.
We had this conversation and firmly swore to absolutely never reveal that we were already living together before heading to Tom's parents' house. Tom's family runs a small woodworking business, with a factory located next to their home. The factory was originally started by Tom's grandfather, and his father-in-law Dylan is now the second-generation owner. They employ a handful of skilled craftsmen who create custom furniture and interior decor pieces using locally sourced wood. Although it's a small operation, they have long-standing business relationships with companies dating back to Tom's grandfather's days, so while it's not an easy business, they seem to be doing relatively well compared to others in the same trade.
When I was a kid, Dad always told me, "Tom, you're going to take over as the boss one day, so start learning the ropes now." I was constantly made to help out at the factory. So when I decided to go to college, Dad wasn't happy about it.
Has Dylan decided who will take over the factory after him?
No, the craftsmen we have now are skilled but have zero interest in the business side of things. We've tried training younger workers, but no one sticks around long. I think Dad still hopes I'll come back and take over.
Do you have any intentions of coming back here in the future, Tom?
No way. I enjoy my current job that allows me to be involved with skiing. If I ever change careers, it would have to be something ski-related or I definitely wouldn't last.
I was relieved to hear there was no chance of Tom taking over his family's factory. Inheriting the business would inevitably mean I'd be expected to support him and put down roots in that area too. I couldn't imagine living in an unfamiliar place, having to tiptoe around my seemingly old-fashioned parents-in-law. During that first visit to Tom's family home, I came face to face with Tom's parents, who would soon officially become my parents-in-law. We were shown to the living room where I deeply bowed my head to them.
I'm sure I have many shortcomings, but I will do my best to support Tom. I hope for your kind guidance for many years to come.
Yes, of course. I had pondered my words for days and even practiced, but my mother-in-law Caddy simply brushed them off. It was a bit anticlimactic. Still, at least Caddy had replied. Dylan stayed sullenly silent without a word, making me worried I had somehow angered him. But then Tom immediately started a normal conversation, so I figured these two must always be this distant.
By the way, Sophie, what do you do for work?
It was the first time Caddy properly spoke to me. I had expected her to ask about my upbringing or hometown at a time like this, so it threw me off that her first question was about my job. Nevertheless, I explained that I work an office job.
And about how much do you make annually?
She followed up, leaving me momentarily at a loss for words. Is that really something you suddenly ask your son's fiancé? Tom quickly interjected.
That's not something you ask so bluntly.
And warned his mother for me. But even after that, they peppered me with rather blatant questions at every turn, like the rent for the place I live now, and how much property and assets my parents own. Honestly, it was exhausting to field what felt like an interrogation into my and my family's financial situation. I snuck a glance at Tom beside me, who was sending me an apologetic look. Given that Tom's family has made their living running a factory for generations, perhaps they have very strict views about money. The barrage of questions earlier may have been their way of ascertaining whether I or any of my relatives are in debt. And if so, whether there was any risk of their son getting dragged into it. Maybe he wanted to confirm something like that. If they're just concerned about their son being suddenly saddled with a huge debt after marriage, I guess I can understand their perspective to some extent. At the time, I tried not to dwell on it too much. As soon as Caddy finished her spiel, Dylan opened his mouth as if he'd been waiting for his cue.
Well then, why don't you go ahead and take a tour of the factory right away?
His words caught me off guard. Just when I thought Dylan had finally deigned to speak to me, he's suggesting a factory tour out of the blue. Of course, it's his future son-in-law's family business, and I should probably have some idea of what it entails. But I can still hear the sound of machinery operating in the factory even now. Surely they don't expect me to go introduce myself to the employees on the spot like this, do they? The thought made me a bit nervous.
You don't have to remember everything all at once.
As Dylan started to stand up while saying this, Tim stopped him.
Both of you, cut it out already. We came today with the intention of just making introductions. There's no need to show her the factory, is there? Besides, what do you mean she doesn't have to remember it all at once? When she doesn't have to remember anything at all.
Chastened by Tim's forceful tone, Dylan reluctantly sat back down. Tim was absolutely right. It was clear from Dylan's choice of words that he was assuming I would eventually support Tim in taking over the factory. Apparently, Dylan still harbors hopes of having Tim inherit the business. At this point, I was starting to feel a very distinct sense of wariness towards these in-laws. Showing such blatant interest in my financial situation upon first meeting, and scheming from the start to tie me to the family factory that goes beyond just being tactless, in my opinion. This is a bit of an unbelievable situation. I understand that marrying Tim means inevitably being connected to these people. But I was realizing with stark clarity that having a close relationship with them in my daily life would be impossible. Sensing the increasingly tense atmosphere, Tim stepped in.
Any further discussion can wait until we meet again.
With that, he wrapped things up and we were done. As we were about to leave, Caddy was trying to tell Tim something in a low voice while walking with us. Tim was clearly exasperated as he dealt with her. And so, I was finally able to get away from Tim's family home. I found out later that Caddy's parting complaint to him were,
just because you're married doesn't mean you should become distant from your family. Make sure you think carefully and visit home.
It seemed like a pretty blatant guilt trip, but from Caddy's perspective, maybe she feels a sense of loneliness, as if I've stolen Tim away from her. But Tim seems exhausted by both Dylan pressuring him to take over the factory and Caddy constantly demanding excessive family time. He clearly has no desire to see them frequently. Of course, it's not like their relationship is hostile. Quirks aside, I'm sure Tim's parents act this way because they care about him. And Tim himself doesn't seem to want to stir up discord with them either. I wanted to respect Tim's feelings too. However, after talking to them for the first time today, I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't handle a life with frequent meddling from those in-laws. I told Tim my honest feelings. I even conveyed that if there was any possibility of living with those two, it might make marriage itself difficult. Of course I love Tim, but I'm convinced that I'd be unable to maintain my peace of mind living together with those people.
My parents can be unintentionally overbearing with their opinions sometimes, so it's totally understandable that you feel that way, Sophie.
That's what Tim said.
I'm not considering ever living with them long term. And I absolutely won't let our lives get so intertwined that you end up dealing with their interference, Sophie.
He promised. I didn't want to reconsider my decision to get married, so I was truly relieved when he said that. However, even though we refrained from contacting them, my in-laws didn't do the same. Immediately after the greetings, my in-laws started making various proposals and demands to us. The most troublesome thing was their meddling in our wedding plans.
Tim is our only son and he's precious to us, So we want you to have the wedding in the way that has been passed down in this family for generations.
They kept insisting persistently. From an early stage, Tim and I had planned to have the wedding ceremony in a church and the reception as a small-scale event with only close relatives and friends. But Tim's parents even demanded that we hold the ceremony in their hometown. Furthermore, when they said we should make the reception bigger so they could invite many of their relatives, I felt anger welling up inside me. I don't want them interfering with our important ceremony. I told Tim that I wanted him to make them stop meddling any further. Of course, Tim felt the same way I did, but he looked pained being caught between his parents and me, so this time I decided to yield. Considering our life after marriage, I told my in-laws that we wanted to postpone the ceremony until we could save up a bit more money so we wouldn't use up all our savings on just the wedding, and smoothed things over for the moment. And so, our married life started while postponing the ceremony. I told my colleagues at work and friends that we decided to use the money for the reception on our daily life instead. Most of our acquaintances of the same generation agreed it was a more rational and better choice. For me, it was disappointing not being able to have a wedding ceremony, but I was very happy that we could officially submit the marriage registration and become husband and wife. And finally, our married life began. We were already living together, but living with a clear perspective on how we would overcome the rest of our lives together felt very fresh. And avoiding direct contact with my in-laws didn't cause anything in particular that made the relationship deteriorate. 2 years passed by in a flash. And I became pregnant with Tim's child and gave birth to a healthy baby boy without any issues. When I returned to my hospital room from the delivery room, Tim, who had been eagerly awaiting my son and I, walked up and held our child for the first time. I expected him to let out a cry of joy, but instead, doubtful words reached my ears as I finished giving birth.
His eyes are blue. Why? Is this child not mine?
I couldn't understand what he meant. Why was Tim glaring at me with such a grim expression? I tried to think with my still exhausted and dazed mind, but nothing came to mind.
What are you saying? That child is yours, Tim. What's wrong with his eyes? Look for yourself. His eyes are blue. Those aren't the eyes of our family. Since you undoubtedly gave birth to him, doesn't that mean he has a blue-eyed foreigner for a father? Are you saying I cheated on you? I absolutely never did such a thing. Then why are his eyes blue? Both of us have brown eyes. I've never heard of a blue-eyed child being born between two brown-eyed people.
I tried to say something in return, but a nurse who came running in surprise at the commotion intervened, and the situation settled down for the moment. After some time passed, I spoke with Tim again. Tim had regained his composure on the surface, but his eyes were still harsh as he looked at me. More than anything, he wouldn't even try to hold our son. He thought I had cheated on him with a blue-eyed man who wasn't him and gave birth to that man's child. I had absolutely never betrayed him like that. However, the fact was that our son's eyes were blue. I couldn't explain the reason why.
It's not that you can't explain, you just don't want to admit you cheated, right? Please believe me. There must be some way we can investigate this.
I somehow managed to say that, and just as it occurred to me that we could surely prove it if we had the genes tested, my in-laws burst into the hospital room.
Dad, Mom, why are you here?
Tim raised his voice in surprise. Tim shouldn't have told my in-laws that I had gone into labor, being considerate of how I wanted to avoid meeting them as much as possible. Of course, we couldn't not inform them of the birth, but we had intended to let them know after both the baby and I had fully settled down after the delivery.
I have an acquaintance among the nurses here.
And of course she knows about Tim, so she went out of her way to let us know that our grandchild was about to be born.
Not informing us of the birth of our first grandchild, what an unfilial son. Well, I guess I was kind of the same when you were born though.
The two of them had the biggest smiles on their faces that I had ever seen. You just had a baby, so why do you have such a displeased look on your face?
Yeah, the child was born healthy. But since I found out it's not mine, of course I'd have this kind of expression.
At the words Tim spat out, my in-laws exchanged glances with a look of incomprehension. Eventually, my mother-in-law peered at the baby's face and let out a loud voice.
It's true. This isn't Tim's child. Look at his eyes, he has blue eyes. What did you say?
My father-in-law, who had also shouted and stared at the baby.
You're right. His eyes are blue. I've never seen a child with eyes like that,
he said, turning back to face me. What is the meaning of this, Sophie? Were you planning on tricking Tim into raising some foreigner's child? What an appalling woman.
I thought you seemed rather distant when we met, but to think you had such intentions. That's not it. There must be some reason for this. I'm sure we'll understand if we investigate.
It was painful to have them hurl such heart-wrenching words at me one after another. But what hurt the most was that Tim, who should have been protecting me, was glaring at me together with my in-laws. A nurse, unable to bear watching my in-laws shouting in further agitation, calling me an adulterous woman and saying they'd make me pay compensation and divorce, ushered them out of the room. When she said she would call the police if they continued making a commotion and disturbing the mental stability of the patient, my in-laws finally withdrew quietly. I had fallen from the heights of being blessed with a son to the depths of despair. More than anything, the shock of being turned away by Tim, who should have been my greatest ally, left me unable to even shed tears and simply dumbfounded. After a while, my in-laws said,
"There's no point in looking at the face of someone else's child,"
and left. Tim sat silently with an air of not wanting to even look at the baby I was holding.
"I rushed out of the office because you went into labor, so what am I supposed to say when my colleagues congratulate me? Ugh."
I learned for the first time that Tim was capable of such cruelty. As I sat there unable to say anything more, Tim stood up.
"I'm not coming here anymore,"
he said coldly and tried to leave the room. Was this the end of my relationship with Tim and we would get divorced? The anxiety of whether this child would suddenly lose his father washed over me.
"Hey, wait! I know it's impossible to just ask you to believe me. So at least, before you end your relationship with me, please listen to one last request from me."
Hearing that, Tim reluctantly stopped in his tracks.
"Please ask the hospital to do a DNA test. The results should be available in about a week. If it determines he's not your child, then you can abandon me. You can even demand compensation. I haven't betrayed you. Even if we find out much later when the child grows up that he is yours, it will be too late to start over as father and son then."
My final plea seemed to reach Tim's heart, if only slightly. Tim said,
"Fine. That will make the truth clear,"
and left the room. After that, I wasn't in any state of mind to talk to anyone. I told the nurse that I couldn't see anyone else until my parents, whom I had contacted as soon as I went into labor, arrived, and had her refuse any visitors. That night, my parents, who had forcibly transferred trains to get there, rushed to the hospital barely in time for visiting hours. The moment I saw my parents' faces for the first time in a while, I shed tears of relief that someone had finally come who would be on my side.
"You did really well."
What happened to Tim? Has he not come yet? Asked that, I hesitated over whether to tell them what had happened here until then. But I had nothing to be ashamed of, and I thought that if the results of the upcoming test came out, my relationship with Tim could be repaired, so I decided to keep quiet to avoid giving my parents unnecessary worry. I made the painful excuse that Tim had been with me until just before, but he had to go back to the office for a bit because there was some work he absolutely had to do himself. And my mother Lenore gently held my son, whom neither Tim nor my in-laws had held, and peered at his face. What kind of reaction would Lenore have upon seeing his blue eyes? If she reacted the same way as Tim and the others? Thinking that, I couldn't look at Lenore's face and inadvertently lowered my head.
"Oh, how adorable. His features take after Tim, don't they? Let me see. Oh, you're right. But the shape of his nose resembles Sophie."
My father Sullivan also looked happy. It was a very ordinary reaction for grandparents seeing their first grandchild, but their response full of joy made me truly happy from the bottom of my heart.
"Look, this child has blue eyes too. Just like when Sophie was born."
I reflexively raised my head.
"What?"
and let out a surprised. My eyes met those of my parents, who were smiling with faces full of affection. My eyes were blue when I was born too.
"That's right. Oh, did we never tell you?"
It wasn't that uncommon among our relatives. We probably didn't think it was worth mentioning. Wondering what on earth they were talking about, I asked for a more detailed explanation. My mother didn't have particularly detailed knowledge, but apparently my father had heard a more in-depth explanation from a doctor friend of his, so he explained it to me. Even if a person was born with blue eyes, there are cases where the color changes due to genetics. The frequency tends to be higher in the South when looking nationwide, and it's known that the area where I was born has an especially high tendency for that. And it's also apparently quite common for eyes that were blue to gradually approach the level of brown as the child grows. I was a child who fit that exact case. Indeed, I had been told a few times before that my eye color looked lighter. My eye color probably looks a bit lighter than other people's because what were originally blue eyes gradually turned brown. But since this wasn't an unusual story where I'm from, it seems my parents never mentioned it to me after I grew up. However, my mother said she must have told me about it a few times when I was little. If that's true, I may have just let it go in one ear and out the other. But I didn't care about such minor details. Knowing the reason why I had a blue-eyed child and that I could properly explain it to Tim now, the tears I had been holding back started flowing out. My parents, surprised by my sudden crying, held my shoulders in bewilderment. For a while, I just indulged in that sensation and continued crying. During that time, my son stayed cradled in my mother's arms, breathing peacefully in his sleep. Eventually, when my parents heard from me about what had just happened, they became furious. I had never seen my parents display such intense anger before. My parents immediately tried to call Tim, who had gone home earlier, to come back. But since visiting hours were almost over, they said they would meet Tim outside and left the hospital room. I heard later that my father had expressed his tremendous anger to Tim, saying,
"How could you not believe your wife's story at all, not even hold the baby, and go home like that?"
And Tim had been thoroughly contrite. He told Tim about the area where I was born and raised, about the mechanism behind the different eye color. He apparently even sent Tim photos of neighborhood children with blue eyes to show him. And Tim was apparently convinced by that. I was told that if my mother hadn't intervened at the end, my father looked ready to punch Tim. Hearing that Tim had apologized with tears in his eyes, saying he was truly sorry, I felt my intense anger towards him abate slightly. The next day, Tim took an emergency day off work and rushed to my hospital room first thing in the morning to apologize for his words and actions yesterday. "I'm sorry. I had this preconceived notion that if both parents have brown eyes, the child will always be born with brown eyes too. I judged based solely on the bias that a child's eyes can't be blue unless one of the parents has blue eyes."
It's okay. I didn't know that my eyes were blue when I was little either. Or rather, I didn't remember. And the DNA test results aren't back yet, so right now I'm just happy you believe this story.
Tim promised to take responsibility for clearing up his parents' misunderstanding himself, and vowed not to create any more opportunities for me to come face to face with them in the future. Later, Tim called his parents home, but when that didn't work, he apparently ended up going directly to their house to explain the situation. However, it seems that even so, his parents wouldn't abandon their suspicion towards me. They stubbornly insisted that we still couldn't know until the DNA test results came back, and even criticized Tim for discarding his doubts so quickly. But this time, Tim had also looked into and come to understand that there was a possibility of blue-eyed children being born even from brown-eyed parents, and had come to believe in my innocence. However, no matter how much Tim explained those things, his parents wouldn't listen at all. On the contrary, they insulted us, saying we were just putting on an act and even getting the neighbors involved. They even went so far as to say that if Tim broke up with me and took over the factory soon, they would find him a better woman. Tim finally exploded in anger at their utter lack of obedience.
"If you two continue to insult Sophie like this, I'm cutting ties with you."
And apparently stormed out, saying so. And about a week passed. Our son had no health issues whatsoever, and by then I had completely recovered from the initial uproar. And on the day I was discharged from the hospital with our son, the DNA test results arrived. Tim, who had purposely brought the unopened results all the way from home to my hospital room, opened the envelope in front of me. It stated that a high enough match rate to definitively say the baby was mine and Tim's child had been confirmed. Tim stared long and hard at the test results, and finally bowed his head deeply to me and said, I'm truly sorry. I couldn't completely forgive him with just this apology after he had hurled such verbal abuse at me. But Tim had been convinced until that moment that a child inherits the eye color of either the father or mother. But I had thought the same thing. If the child born looked nothing like one's own at a glance, perhaps one would get flustered like that. Thinking that, I couldn't bring myself to say we should divorce. Tim, who apologized to me many times over, said he would tell his parents about these results and left the house. I didn't want to have any contact with his parents in any form, so I even thought it would be fine not telling them at all.
If we leave this misunderstanding as is, my parents might scheme something to make us divorce using this as a reason. They're already spreading rumors to the neighbors. So I have to properly convey the facts to them.
Hearing Tim say that, I decided to leave his parents to Tim and not think about it at all. Eventually, Tim returned after finishing the phone call and said with a relieved expression,
I explained it to them properly. Just in case, I also took a photo of the test results and emailed it to them. I told them I'm not going to visit them in the future and asked them not to come see us either.
With those words, I could feel that all my connections to his parents had vanished. However, as I was preparing to be discharged and going through the procedures for billing and such, his parents showed up. After that phone call, they had immediately hailed a taxi and rushed over. I heard Tim, I told them not to come, who was carrying our luggage, mutter,
Sophie, I heard it's been proven the baby is Tim's son. That's great. Now everything can be smoothed over. Yeah, and it's a boy too. Thank you for giving birth to a healthy heir.
I was speechless. There's an expression to flip-flop on someone, but this wasn't like that at all. It was as if they had flipped the heavens and earth with how drastically their attitude had changed. Could it be the same mouths saying these words that had cursed me as an adulteress?
Take this chance to divorce her and get compensation money.
And hurled insults at me just days ago. As I stood there dumbfounded, Tim, who had been standing in front of me, dropped his shoulders and crouched down on the spot. Tim apparently felt so deflated he couldn't stand at the sight of his parents' utterly self-centered behavior. As if not to miss that chance, my mother-in-law slipped past Tim and approached right in front of me.
Here, let me hold him.
I instinctively drew back from my mother-in-law, who was extending both hands. Then even my father-in-law approached. You too, as the child grows bigger your place will likely get too cramped, so you can come live with us. Luckily we have plenty of land, so we can even add on to the house. The grandchild will probably be happier with more liveliness too. I felt slightly dizzy. To think they'd even suggest living together. Perhaps they have no sense of shame. Staying with these people any longer would likely impede my postpartum recovery. But I didn't want to line up my words here and argue back either. No matter what I said, my father-in-law probably wouldn't listen, and more than anything, I didn't want to let my newborn son hear my angry voice. I brushed away my mother-in-law's hands that persistently kept reaching out trying to hold my son, approached the taxi they had arrived in, and conveyed my intention to get in with my gaze. Tim, who had been standing there dumbfounded, noticed my desire to leave this place as soon as possible and helped me get in, pushing aside his parents who were standing there stunned at being blatantly ignored.
Hurry and go!
Tim also got in and told the driver. The taxi immediately drove off, leaving the hospital behind. For a moment, I saw the side of his dumbfounded parents seeing us off reflected in the side mirror, but I never looked back again. Later, Tim reluctantly answered one of the several calls that came in from his parents. In a cold voice, Tim told his parents on the other end of the line that he was cutting ties with them.
I want Dad and Mom to have absolutely no involvement in our lives anymore. To not even apologize to Sophie and suggest living together is unthinkable as human beings. I won't let either of you see Sophie or our son at all. Please don't think of our son as your grandchild. I'll never let you two meet him, so give up.
Saying that, he hung up and immediately did something on his mobile phone before putting it away. After that, no more calls came in, so I assumed he had blocked their numbers, but Tim told me without saying anything unnecessary that we would never be bothered about this matter again. However, knowing his parents, no matter how strongly Tim declared he was cutting ties with them, in the end they might even show up at our apartment. But even if his parents took such actions, I knew I no longer had to worry about anything. Actually, a little before our son was born, Tim had gotten a job as a ski resort manager through an introduction from an acquaintance. Tim had been so eager to work in a job related to skiing that he had specifically chosen to work at a sports equipment company. So when he received word of this position,
"I definitely want to do it,"
he was overjoyed and had replied. That place was in my hometown, where my parents also live. For me too, this job offer had the best possible conditions. If possible, I had wanted to give birth at a hospital there, but by the time this job change was decided, my due date was fast approaching. Transferring to a different hospital suddenly during this time was high risk, and more than anything, there were few hospitals that handled deliveries there, and they were all full with local pregnant women. So in that case, we had decided I would give birth at the hospital here where I had been receiving regular checkups from the beginning. That was the situation, so we had decided to wait until our son was old enough for long-distance travel and move the whole family together. We finished relocating our base of living while keeping this move and job change hidden from Tim's parents until the very end. By the time a month had passed since our son was born, everything was over. Fortunately, our son grew up healthy in both mind and body, and no issues arose at all during the long-distance move. In the end, during the time it took for us to finish moving like that, his parents never showed up at our apartment. Several years have passed since then, but an opportunity to have contact with his parents has yet to come. Our son, who is now running around energetically, continues to grow up without even knowing of his grandparents' existence. At one point, I had a chance to talk with an acquaintance living near his parents' house, and they told me about the recent state of affairs around that factory. After we suddenly cut off contact, not only were they unable to see their grandson, but even their only son Tim avoided them, and apparently this caused both his parents to completely lose their energy. Perhaps because Dylan's vigor had declined, he was unable to turn around the factory's performance that had been on a downward trend, and he apparently decided on his own to shut it down. The factory that Dylan had been so eager to have Tim take over and even pass on to his grandchild no longer exists. The acquaintance had seen my mother-in-law Caddy out shopping a few times, but said she seemed lifeless. Eventually Caddy injured her leg and it impeded her mobility, and she apparently became unable to even do housework satisfactorily. Dylan, who had no life skills and had never even done his own laundry, was apparently seen by people many times wearing terribly dirty clothes. And now, it seems both that house and factory are deserted and have become completely vacant. This is just my guess, but I think the two of them, having lost their ability to live on their own, were probably taken into a facility for elderly support or something similar by the government. Of course, I have no intention of going out of my way to confirm their whereabouts. And we, the husband and wife who became ski resort managers, are working hard at our jobs every day in the dreamlike environment of working at the ski resort we love. Since it's an environment where we can visit my parents' home with just a little travel, we go back and forth and help each other out when needed. My parents come over all the time, making up various excuses because they want to see their grandson even when they don't really need help. Our son is very attached to my parents too and really looks forward to seeing them. Having frequently gone to the ski resort from the time he gained awareness, our son is naturally showing an interest in skiing. He's already imitating skiing form and making us and my parents smile. Once this child grows up enough to be able to ski, the day will surely come when we can all ski together as a family. I can hardly wait for that day to arrive.